Richard Swinbank from EMG Solicitors. Thanks for joining me. So, when it comes to conveyancing, when might I need to go and get some advice?
The process of conveyancing can be quite tricky to navigate if you haven't got much experience of it. Normally when you put an offer in an estate agent, that's normally the time that you might need a solicitor. The estate agent might have some recommendations, but you are free to choose who you wish. You might know a friend who's used a good solicitor. You might have already been on the Law Society's website to search for a local solicitor. But normally when you put your offer in, if you have a solicitor ready, that's the normal time you'd need to instruct somebody.
I'm going to tell you the truth. I've never actually bought a house, so perhaps talking about the different stages that you've got
Yes.
might be helpful.
Okay. So you put your offer in, you see a house you like, you love it, you go to the estate agents, you put your offer in. Quite often at the time you put your offer in, you'll be asked to provide some sort of finance details to show that you can afford it. So if you have a mortgage in principle ready, or details of your mortgage broker that the estate agent can get in touch with, that will be helpful. If you have details of a solicitor, then as I say, you can provide it to the estate agent just then. After that stage, if your offer is fully accepted by the agent, a memorandum of sale will be issued to your solicitor and the seller's solicitor. And that's when the ball starts really rolling. There is quite a lot of paperwork that comes out at the start of a transaction in terms of client care information and questionnaires. This is all information searching at the start, so it can be quite daunting, I think, for clients who are buying a property right at the outset, because they are bombarded with a lot of paperwork. But that's so we don't have to keep on coming back to the client throughout the course of the transaction. We try and get as much information as we can at the outset, so we not have to go backwards and forwards. The contract pack follows then from the seller's solicitor. Your solicitor will review it, let you have details, let you have a plan, other important documentation. They will raise inquiries, they will get searches, your mortgage offer will be forthcoming. The whole process depends, normally take anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks on average, which is not particularly quick, but there's a whole, obviously we're doing all our due diligence. You as a buyer might want to get a survey, but your solicitor will guide you through it. And that's one thing I would say, if you can have strike up a good rapport with your solicitor, either on the phone or by email, asking for regular updates, just being as open and honest as you can as to where you are, think about completion dates, then yeah, it might be sooner than 8 weeks, it might be slightly longer than 12 weeks.
So presumably it helps to be prepared. I guess as a client, what kind of preparations can you undertake to make sure it goes as smoothly as possible?
Have your finance in place, make sure you know what you can afford and borrow. There are numerous mortgage brokers and IFAs out there who will be able to assist you. Think about having a survey if you need it. You don't have to have a survey, but you're making the biggest purchase of your life, so it's probably a good idea to do that. And yeah, make sure you've got the right legal representation in place if you need it, which you probably will, because there are potentially some pitfalls with conveyancing that your solicitor will be able to steer you through.
So we've already mentioned that you're a solicitor, but is it possible for me to do this work by myself?
The benefits of representing yourself are obviously cost. You wouldn't have any legal fees to pay. And you might feel like you're able to control the transaction. However, if you do instruct a solicitor, we follow something called the Conveyancing Quality Standard and Protocol, which all solicitors use across the country, so we all try and do things the same way. Where we follow that protocol, there are certain standards and procedures that we must abide by. If you're acting by yourself, it can be a little bit tricky to try and reflect that. Another problem you might have if you're acting for yourself, if you're purchasing in particular, is you won't be on you have great difficulty in trying to be on a lender's panel. Solicitors have insurance and have to jump through lots of hoops to be on a lender's panel, quite rightly, because you're dealing with a lender's money. The mortgage lender won't release funds to you as an individual purchasing because you won't have the right insurance and detail, etc. like that. So yes, by all means you can do it, and there's a protocol for when you have a client or a person who's not represented. But it's a bit more tricky from the solicitor on the other side, that's all. It may well also increase the solicitor who is instructed their fees may be increased because you have to do lots of other things if you've got a person who isn't represented. But absolutely, it's possible, yes.
So I guess one of the reasons why I might be a bit nervous about using a solicitor is because it sounds quite expensive. Is there a way I can find out a little bit of information about how much it might cost in advance of me having to use a solicitor?
Absolutely, yes. Their solicitors should have easily obtainable information on their websites. Most conveyancing firms will have a fixed fee service, which should be easily obtainable on websites, on their company websites, easily accessible. They are fixed fee, as I say. There may be disbursements, and it should be easy to get a quote without even talking to anybody at a firm. Alternatively, you can pick up the phone and speak to various solicitors just to try and get quotes. But those fees are fixed, as I say, and I think that's quite important to note. No matter if the transaction is 4 weeks or 12 weeks, you'll still be paying the same. And that should give you some comfort. The value that a solicitor can add to a transaction is, of course, I'm going to say this, is worthy and immeasurable in that they will ensure that the property you are buying is being purchased correctly and that you can sell it easily. And that's really important part of our role, to make sure that the client can sell it. That's the last thing they're thinking of course, when they're purchasing. But we've got to think about how they're going to sell it.
So I think you've spoken about how much it costs just for the solicitor's cost, but I heard you mention the word disbursements. What's that?
So disbursements will be sometimes third-party costs. Land registry disbursements, for land registry have their own set of fees that we've got to pay upon registration of the property on a purchase. There may be some search fees involved as well for getting all your relevant searches on the property you are purchasing. ID checks are quite common now. So yeah, those are disbursements, but all those should be included in the quote, and everything should be itemised. There should be nothing hidden. When you get your bill at the end, it should match the quote that you've been given, and if it doesn't, we would expect the client to challenge that.
So I guess it sounds like I could shop around to see who might be the best person for me to
Oh,
use.
absolutely. It depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a great service, fees might be slightly higher at one firm. If you're looking for a cheap quote, then you'll be able to find that as well. But it's definitely worth getting a few quotes to find out how communicative it will be to speak with that solicitor. You want them to be able to reply to you, in good time. Ideally, you want someone who's got experience. You'll find that out by talking with them on the phone as well. I know at my firm, I like to talk to clients, and they can talk to me. I think they find that quite reassuring that I'm going to be doing the work, and I'm able to talk to them now, rather than just come all through the quote system, all by email.
And I guess they say it's one of the most stressful things you can do, so having someone else to talk to might not be a bad idea.
All the time, yes. We get that often. So yes, it is a very stressful time, and we appreciate that. So if we can give them some sort of guidance, which is a very important part of our role, to reassure them what the steps are, what the procedure is, then that will give them confidence and be able to use us. Our job is to guide them through the process. The client shouldn't be, of course they're going to be nervous, but if we can try and steer them to what the next steps are. I mean, that's the great thing with conveyancing. There are procedural steps that you've got to follow, so you know what's coming next. I would say quite a lot of the time, where there is a problem, it's always fixable, and we need to tell that to the clients. This is the problem, but this is the solution.
So whilst I was looking in this particular area for questions to harass you with, I came across this term, unbundling. What is that?
So unbundling is a term used where a client might only need a solicitor for a very certain amount of things. I'll be honest, I haven't come across it often in my area. I know it's predominantly used, I think, in litigation, but a client can use that. They can represent themselves. They can use solicitor for certain types of things. So a buyer might decide to try and do a purchase themselves. They might be able to raise inquiries themselves. They might be able to order searches themselves. But one thing they probably won't be able to do, as I've touched on before, is act for the lender. So that's where the solicitor will come in, just to act for the lender and act for the client.
So we've spoken a little bit about the process. What are the options available for me to go and find out a bit more information before I have to actually start talking to a solicitor?
Well, there are various websites you can go on to find out about a solicitor. The Law Society has a find a solicitor page, which is very good. Obviously, it's all up to date. You can just type in either a solicitor name or a firm name, and it will bring up details of that said firm. You can find about solicitors in your area, and again, you're welcome to choose who you wish. As I said, estate agents may have some recommendations when you come in to buy or sell a property, but the Law Society website as a whole, range of solicitors that you'd be able to use. Probably the most common thing we get asked often is people just punching things into Google to find out who they can use. Solicitors also have review pages, so look at those too. I know my firm, we use that quite often, and it's great to see the great feedback that we get, which obviously clients will look at. I know when I'm buying something online, I'll try and look at reviews, so I personally use that too. But it's the same with law firms. Look at the reviews, give them a ring. I would say give them a ring, not send an email. If you give them a ring, you talk to the person who'll be actually dealing with the file. Great, you're onto a good thing.
I suppose that's the thing. Once I've saved up all the pounds and pennies for that deposit, which seems to be growing ever larger each day I look at it, it just seems like a phenomenal amount of money. And I guess my first concern is, how do I know that this person is trustworthy and is going to be okay with taking on board my transaction?
Yeah. Well, if you look on the Law Society website, they should have all the relevant details there. If you call them and email the person, great, they're real. I would emphasise always trying to speak to that person. You can decide to act for someone who's local to you, or you can decide to act for someone who's in the northeast, for example, if you're down in Bristol or Birmingham, somewhere like that. You don't have to have somebody acting for you who's local to you. But where that is the case, you want to make sure, as you say, that they are definitely the person who they say they are. If they're on the Law Society and they have an SRA number, Solicitor Regulation Authority number next to them, and you've been on the website and you know who they are, as I say, ring them, make sure you know who they are.
And are there protections that are afforded to consumers who are using a solicitor, as opposed to if they just did it by themselves?
I appreciate you've saved up a long time for your deposit. All your hard-earned cash has gone into there. You want to make sure it's safe. We appreciate that conveyancing the property is probably one of the biggest areas that fraudsters would like to hit, because they can see lots of money potentially moving from clients, lay people to solicitors. We know that fraudsters will pretend to be that solicitor and intercept emails, try and change bank details. So we would always say, again, it's all about communication. Before you send any funds to your solicitor, call that solicitor who's acting for you to make sure the bank details are the same, and put them on notice that you are sending those funds. And the funds, when you do send them, should be received reasonably quickly, within hours. If the worst thing happens and funds are intercepted by a fraudster, you need to speak to your solicitor, who will speak to the SRA and speak to your bank, and they should be able to offer some guidance pretty quickly, so we can try and recover some of the funds. But that, I might say, shouldn't and doesn't often happen, but we see it in the press quite often that does happen, which is really unfortunate. But touch wood, in my career, I've never come across that, because we speak with the client.
And I suppose those are not risks that are just because you're using a solicitor. Those are the risks that are inherent in the process, with large amounts of cash, like you say, moving around.
Yes, they are. Yeah, it could happen if you're buying a car, if you're buying a house. Typically, if you're buying a house, you're going to be sending the biggest amount of money you've ever done so in your life. So you want to make sure it gets to the right place. And it's important for the solicitor to acknowledge those funds as soon as they come in. You don't want the client to send funds in at 4:45 on a Friday, and then for the solicitor to go home and come in at 10 o'clock on a Monday. You want to be able to give the client certainty that money is where it should be. But always speak with your solicitor before sending large sums of funds.
So during my research, I've heard lots of talk about chains of buyers and things. I think I know what they are. But in your experience, what are they? How do they work? How long can they get?
Well, a chain can be as long as 12, 13, 14 people in a chain. So there will be somebody at the bottom of the chain who wants to purchase a property. That person who is selling will be buying a property. That place they are buying, those people will be selling to them and buying another property, and so on and so forth. So a chain can be however long it needs to be. Typically, there may be 3, 4, 5 people in the chain. I've only come across significant chains like that only a few times in my career. But again, where that is the case, communication is key. And this is where estate agents can really add value and be a real great assistance in keeping the chain together, keeping everybody updated, as can solicitors. So where you're at when you're in a chain, sometimes the process can take longer, because although you might be ready and your solicitor might be ready, it'll be third parties and people around you, other solicitors and clients that might not be ready. And if there is a problem in the chain, someone loses the mortgage offer, then the chain may well collapse, which is unfortunate. But as long as your solicitor and you are prepared and ready, then there shouldn't be any problems.
And we should just say, when we say a chain collapses, does that mean that the transaction can't go through?
Yes. So yeah, one person is not able to proceed to purchase or sell for one reason. They may lose the mortgage offer. They may have had a change of heart about the property they're purchasing. In this country, you are not obligated to buy the property until it formal exchange of contracts. So, and that process will take almost up to 10, 11, 12 weeks, potentially on a purchase. So at any point, anybody can decide to withdraw from the transaction. So it can be quite fraught, which is obviously why clients get quite stressed. Quite rightly so. I purchased a house recently myself, for myself and my family, and given that I do this on a day job, I was really nervous, stressed. So I appreciate that from the client's point of view, that we need to keep them updated, especially when we're in the chain.
It sounds like buying a house can be quite a long, drawn-out process. How important is speed? Is that a useful thing, or?
Speed is good. Everyone wants to see a purchase completed quickly. It's our job to advise clients and other third parties that I appreciate, we want to have this concluded successfully. We've got no interest in having it hanging around and dragging on, but we have various due diligence things to do to make sure, as I say, that the clients can sell on a purchase, in particular, the property easily. Or if they're selling, we want to make sure the client can sell without any encumbrances or pitfalls that might come back to bite them afterwards. So we have quite a long list of due diligence that we have to undertake. So speed is great. Everybody wants speed, but we've still got to do the job properly and thoroughly to protect the client.
Richard, you've got to the stage now where you've relaxed me so much about this process that I'm beginning to pick out wallpaper in my mind. Before I go and press the trigger on that, is there anything about misconceptions for the conveyancing process that I need to be aware of?
I think a lot of clients, first-time buyers, don't know, understandably, about the process. So I always think it's really helpful just to try and, on initial instruction, to tell them what to expect, set expectations. That will obviously have a good relationship foundation for the rest of the transaction. You should always make sure, as I say, your finance is in order. There will be a lot of paperwork at the outset. If you're not sure about how to complete that, then speak with your solicitor. Wherever possible, I know in my firm we like to speak to clients. We like to think we're a little bit different in that respect. So if you can do that, great. If it's by email, fine. We appreciate everybody is so busy. It can be a long drawn out process. That's worst case scenario. But as I say, we've got no interest in keeping clients hanging on for as long as they can. We appreciate they're purchasing their dream property. We want to have a happy client. And then we've got other clients to look after too. But it's a huge purchase, and we want to make sure that everything's done properly. And then hopefully when the client sells the property, if it's a purchase, they'll come back to us to have the property sold.
You've already mentioned perhaps occasionally people aren't satisfied by the help that they get from the solicitor. Is there anything that they can do if they're not comfortable with the service they've received?
Yes, there is. Again, I think this is all about managing expectations. Sometimes you will have a problem on a purchase or a sale that needs to be explained to a client carefully. You can't go to a client and say there's a problem. You need to go to the client and say, we have this issue, but this is how we're going to resolve it. If that's been explained throughout the transaction and it falls down or collapses for whatever reason, but you've explained to the client and parties around that, unfortunately, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, Z, That's, although very frustrating for all parties concerned, that would be acceptable. What I would say is not agreeable is where a client may not have been able to get hold of their solicitor, they're having trouble communicating, they don't understand, and that's why they're frustrated. If the client isn't happy with that, they can decide to disinstruct and then reinstruct another solicitor. They are at liberty to do that at any time. As solicitors, we would always want to try and avoid that. Client care is absolutely paramount for my firm, and I'm sure all other firms that do conveyancing too. The last maybe 2.5, 3 years have been exceptionally busy for property solicitors. But that said, the client is purchasing the house of their dreams. They're totally focused on that, and we want to make sure that journey continues. If you're not happy about something, you must tell your solicitor, either by email or on the phone, and make sure that is addressed properly and make sure you're happy with it. And if you're not, you're at liberty to choose who you wish to go to afterwards.
And is there any mechanism in law firms to make a complaint, perhaps?
Yes, there is, yes. This should all be outlined in your initial letter you get from your solicitor, which will be very detailed. There'll be quite a wad of paperwork for you to look at when you get it. Don't be alarmed by that. It's just to make sure we'd have to keep on coming back to you, as I say. Within that small Bible of documentation will be information about the complaint procedure and what happens if you have any issues that you're not happy with. You must look at that carefully, and if there is an issue, you must follow that complaint procedure. There will probably be a complaints person within the firm, and in the first instance, you need to follow the complaints procedure and address that to the complaints person, and they will respond to you and take it from there. You normally have a certain amount of time as a solicitor's firm to respond to a complaint, but we would always hopefully try and we would like to speak to the client before to see if it can be resolved before it goes down a formal complaint.
Okay. I suppose, Richard, last question from me. Are you paint or wallpaper?
Paint, 100%.
And will you be assisting me if I do choose to take that plunge?
Happy to help.
Fair enough. Richard Swinbank from EMG Solicitors, thanks for your time.
Thank you.